Welcome to the Enterprise GTM podcast, hosted by Tim Zonka and Vidya Raman. Each episode takes a deep dive into how to successfully maneuver the unique dynamics of enterprise go-to-market while candidly discussing successful approaches, pitfalls, and failures alike. Our guests are seasoned company founders, GTM execs, technology buyers, and end users. Please note that the views expressed by individuals in these podcasts are not to be treated as investment advice. They are also not representing the views of their employers, current or previous.
All right, welcome to yet another episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Today, Tim and I are super excited to have the one and only Adam Frankl on the Enterprise GTM podcast. Adam was the first VP of marketing at not one, not two, but three developer-facing unicorns, namely Neo4j, JFrog, and Sourcegraph. He's also a highly sought-after advisor for founders of early-stage developer tools and DevOps startups on increasing developer awareness and adoption. He's also writing a book called The Developer-Facing Startup that is geared towards founders of early-stage startups whose primary audience is developers. We've had the privilege of previewing the book, and I found myself glued to it until I finished it. Having been a DevTool user in my earlier career and now being an investor in DevTools, the book resonated with me very, very deeply. I will just say that it is an absolute must-read for founders in this space. There's some very foundational aspects of building a DevTool startup that Adam touches upon in the book. What's even more valuable, at least in my view, are the very, very specific and actionable advice that Adam provides on so many important topics, from how do you build your technical advisory board? How should you think about packaging, pricing? Who should you be hiring in marketing and when? And so much more. So with that, Adam, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, Adam, it's great to have you here. And it sounds like you're at a pretty exciting moment with all this stuff getting the book out the door and making sure it's, posted in the right places on Amazon or what have you. So we appreciate your time.
Well, you guys, this is actually the first step on my book tour. You are the first podcast that I actually have participated in.
That's a privilege.
Hey, I'd love to start then, especially with the focus on developers. I'd love to hear from you. How do you think developers are different from other technologists, especially, other folks within, white collar professionals, even people within tech organizations?
Thank you for asking that, because that really is the core question about why developers are different. And it's really due to developer culture. And when I say developer, let me define the term. I define a developer as someone who writes code as part of their profession. So not only what we think of as full stack developers, but also SREs, data scientists, data engineers, or anyone who's been a developer, such as, a CTO or a VP of engineering, right? They all come from a culture in which writing code is a central part of your identity. And this means that there is a cultural mindset that people have that is different from the way that business executives operate. I have friends who are doctors and lawyers, and they tell me they have been exhaustively trained in how to deal every type of situation that they're going to see in their entire career. It's very formal. Whereas in the development world, developers are expected to solve problems that they haven't seen before, that perhaps no one has seen before, to a deadline, which when you think about it is kind of insane. And this makes developers kind of counterintuitively the most social type of professional there is, right? Because, developers have a reputation for being introverted, and a lot of introverts become developers. But the truth is, if you watch how developers actually work, there's always two or more screens. One screen is the code screen. The second screen is what I call the answer screen. And whenever they've got a problem, they're on the answer screen, right? They're looking for how have their peers solved that problem, right? And is the way they've solved it appropriate to me? They rely heavily on networks of peers inside and outside their corporation in order to make any progress. And you have to understand this. if you want to influence developers to adopt your technology.
And, especially with a marketing background that we share, like I'm anxious to dig into some of your point of view on marketing to developers. But before we get there, connect the dots between that and just the broader company. If you have a dev tool startup, based on what you just said, marketing aside, just even in general, it will have different DNA than a B2B startup. Talk about that.
So the fundamental rule for developers is that you have to show value first. You can be a very influential developer who talks at conferences and has written books. The minute you become a vendor, developer trust in you drops to zero because developers rightly think you're trying to sell them something. And all of a sudden, no one believes you. Every claim you make, whether you speak it or you put it on your website, is going to be doubted because the developer audience is the most skeptical audience there is, right? But there's a flip side to this, which is developers don't lie to other developers, right? Have you had the experience of going to a developer meetup and someone gets up there and says, I want to talk about my project, but before I tell you what it does, here are the 10 things it doesn't do, right? No developer ever wants to be accused of exaggerating the capabilities of their project. What that means from a marketing perspective, right? It means every claim that you make about your software needs to be backed up with proof because developers are super skeptical. And the second thing is the only proof that really counts is social proof. Developers want to hear from their peers how they have solved problems and how they've used your technology effectively, right? If you just go out and say something on your website, that's merely an assertion. If your user says it, then that's evidence.
Mm-hmm. Kind of diving into then some of even just the marketing that you said talk about there. There's kind of this myth that developers hate marketing. And
let me talk about that. I've got a whole chapter in my book, right, called "Developers Hate Marketing." Here's the problem when you're founding a startup, right? Is you need to do marketing, and 100% of the founders I work with are developers who see a problem, have an idea for a solution, and want to found a startup to go attack this solution, right? They've never been a marketer. They have never been trained in marketing, right? And so they're wondering, like, how do we raise awareness here? And a very common thing they do is they hire a marketer who has been successful in a B2B company, because after all, developers work for businesses, right? This should be like B&B. And so you have a successful B2B marketing executive shows up and says, oh yeah, this product is just like every other product that I've managed, right? And they bring in a dozen programs that have all been successful for this executive in the past, but they've never been aimed at developers. And they all fail, usually after consuming a lot of money, right? At that point, the marketing executive or the soon-to-be former marketing executive throws up their hands and say, developers hate marketing, okay? The truth is developers hate bad marketing. Developers love good marketing. Good marketing to developers creates people who are loyal to you and will be your champions. But you can't just take programs that work in the B2B or even the B2C world and expect them to work in the B2D world.
And so, like any top recommendations or, how especially a founder should think about starting to approach marketing to developers?
Yeah. Oh, I've got so many. Okay. Let me tell you, here's a problem that we created ourselves, right? And this problem started 20, 15 years ago, right? And it was the idea that, the way to get people to find you is through search engine optimization and pay-per-click advertising. And so people would figure out, here are the keywords that people are looking for. I just need to generate content containing these keywords and put it on my website. And then people will just start showing up in droves. Okay. This was a terrible idea. Okay. A startup that I was advising, right, they made software to help people do code reviews. And I asked him, well, what's your plan for having people find you? And he says, I just hired a tech writer and I've contracted for 100 blog posts about code reviews. Right? This person had never done a code review in their life. All they were doing was reading the web, rewriting what other people have written, and just putting it out there just to capture the SEO. And so what happened, because of the way Google stacked the deck for us, every company realized this. And so essentially the web filled up with crap, right? Instead of thinking, code review, I'm going to go see how people have done code reviews. You search for code review. You don't even need to look at the second page of Google. You look at the first page of results and realize there's nothing but crap on this page. Every single one of these results has been SEO optimized and is nothing but trying to trick me into, giving my email address so someone can send endless spam at me. Okay. It's absolutely terrible. And the answer is, right, there is a solution to this. Okay. And it's not something brand new. It's actually something that's really old. What I want people to do is to become not fake thought leaders, but actual thought leaders. Put the research into actually becoming an expert on the problem so that you put out content with your name on it, i.e. it's branded content, not boring corporate content, right? And you become the person that delivers value to large numbers of people because you are helping them do their jobs better. Okay. And there's a lot to unpack in what I just said, right? One of the most important things is that as a founder, you need to be an expert on the problem, not on your product. Okay. Founders want to be an expert on the product because they are an expert. They wrote it. They designed it. They've been thinking about it for years, maybe decades, right? They really want to explain how it works. But believe me, there's nothing less interesting to a prospective user than how your product works, right? They want to know what it does for them. Become an expert on the problem.
Isn't that somewhat counterintuitive? You're saying don't talk about the product, talk about the problem, but don't founders, in order to get the attention of customers, they need them to love the product, their solution.
Yeah, but people are not searching for your product, especially if you're an early stage startup, right? They've never heard of you, right? People know they have a problem. Perhaps they don't know they have a problem, but they know they're in pain, right? And so part of your challenge is, can you articulate the pain better than the developer can, so that when the developer does discover your message, right, they look at these statements of pain and they say, wow, that's exactly what I'm in right now. I didn't even realize there was a solution to this. Right? If you are an expert in the problem, people will assume that you have ideas on how to solve it. If you just want to talk about how your product works, people don't even know what it's for.
Talk more about that. I think in particular, one of the things that you don't have to look too far to see is like how many startups, but especially dev tool companies, end up being just ahead of their times. And so sometimes they fail because they, in marketing speak, we say like, create the urgency. I mean, they couldn't create the urgency for their product. But, and I hear you talking about this tension between the problem that is apparent to those visionaries and then the urgency of where the rest of the market is. So what about the timing? Any advice around figuring out or what markers to look for insofar as timing?
Timing is crucial. And I'd have to say I've worked on a bunch of startups that failed. And being too early to market was probably the most real cause, right? In other words, they were solving a problem that hadn't really materialized yet. Okay, that was still a theoretical problem. I'm working with startups now that are trying to imagine, what is life in 2034 going to be for developers? And let's try and solve their problems because we'll be huge by then. And it's like, yeah, but that's not how people adopt technology. They have problems today, right? They want these problems solved today, right? If you want to get users to adopt your technology in the next 12 months, then you have to be talking about problems that people have now, right? And in terms of creating urgency, right, there is a way to do that, but it involves, working with your users, right? One of the things I advocate for, every company needs to have a technical advisory board, and all of my best ideas have all come from users. I think the key is to realize you're not going to be successful by being clever in a conference room or in a Zoom room, right? You're going to be successful when you talk to large numbers of developers and harvest their best ideas. Because come on, you're developers. These people are smarter than the average bear. Okay. Leverage the fact that your community is greater than the small number of people who are employees of your startup, right? And talk to them and ask them about the trends that are making their life worse every day, especially the trend that if you don't address it, not only will it make your pain more painful every day, one day it's going to create a catastrophe. Right? That's how you identify what makes your particular technology urgent now. Because every company, they were successful yesterday. That's why you're talking to them. Now you're telling them, oh, without my tool, you're not going to be successful tomorrow. That's ridiculous right off the top. So you need to say, this is the trend, right? It's occurring to you, right? Do you agree it's occurring to you? Now let's roll it forward. Now, if you don't address it, here's the catastrophe that it's going to induce.
Yeah. There's something about what you said there reminds me of, I was at Puppet and got a chance to work with the kind of founder and first CEO. And I remember him saying something that stuck with me is that he's like, we were first doing a lot of the development. He's like, I would never put my hands on a keyboard with a customer. I'd always have them do it, and I'd watch over their shoulder to see all the things that I'm skipping over and don't understand the pain of what problems that are kind of surrounding the edges that they're trying to solve. And I thought that was an interesting way to start to tease out, I think, what I just heard you say around like kind of pain, urgency, kind of challenges that are easy to almost be blinded by when you're just focused on your portion of the solution that you put front and center.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're just focused on your point, you may be designing a bridge and have forgotten to put the ramps on both ends.
Yeah.
Okay, to use a bad metaphor.
Well, I want to switch to the topic of selling. So when it comes to kind of building the story for a startup, you make a bold statement, and specifically you asked founders to sell the category, not the solution. And then you go even further and you say, you can't sell your products. Talk about that, unpack that for us.
So this is really important. And this goes back to the culture of developers, right? Developers resist being sold to. And once they realize they're being sold to, all sorts of blocks go up, right? Everything you say becomes doubted, right? Without proof. Okay. So you can't say, the other or my competitor's product is terrible, right? No one uses it because obviously they're in business, right? Obviously there are people using it, and developers, they like to think of themselves as pretty smart, and they know, well, one product better than the other. It's like, well, tell me the uses, which one product is better at the other, or tell me the category of people for whom one product is better than the other. Mm-hmm. What you can do is you can talk about the importance of the category. Here's a type of tool that everyone needs. Right? Here are the problems that it solves. Here's, what you get when you implement it. Here's how you have some of the pain points that it solves, because people may not know they're in pain until you point it out to them. Okay. And so you're allowed to sell the category, right? You're just not allowed to sell your specific product. But that doesn't mean you can't sell your product, although I do say you can't in the book, right? But my point on that sentence is that you can't sell your product. Your users can, right? If you can capture and document the value that your users have achieved from your product, right, then you can use this to provide compelling evidence that developers should adopt the product. So part of your marketing campaigns is to sell the category. And then once someone is committed to implementing a technology in this category, you need to bring on social proof showing how your particular solution is the preferred solution by people that are like the developer.
Yep, that makes sense.
This is just mind-blowing, Adam. I mean, there's so many quotable quotes here. I started writing some of these down. Like, one of the things that you said was the only proof that counts is social proof, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a simple thing, but man, if we can harness that and do it consistently, it can make such a huge difference for companies.
It's not rocket science, right, to realize this, because every one of the CEOs I work with is a developer or was a developer, right? They've been through this process, they've adopted technology, and they always look for who else is using this, right? Am I the type of person who would use this technology? And yet, when they go to market, all they want to do is demo and explain how it works, which are the two least interesting things they can do, right? Because any demo can be magic, right? No one believes demos, right? And no one cares how it works, right? People want to know, what does it do for me, and who else is using it, and what did they achieve?
Yeah, it's strange in that somehow, they became a CEO and a switch just flipped in their brain and they forgot how they operated. But I guess therein lies opportunity for Adam Frankel's book and Adam, everything you do. So, you talk about like the timing, and there's a timing for marketing. And as you point out in the book, many founders treat marketing as the beginning with the launch of their product. Until then, they're like heads down, maybe even in stealth mode, not really saying anything to the outside world. And you have a strong point of view on that. Why is this not an ideal way or even time to market? And when should founders really start thinking about marketing?
Thank you for asking that question, because I started my career as a developer at Lockheed Skunk Works a fantastic aircraft company. I worked on the F-22. If you get a chance to fly it, I recommend it. But at Lockheed, it was like all the engineers built the airplane except for two groups, okay, paint and software. And it was viewed as, okay, when the airplane is done, the software goes in, the paint goes on, and it flies away, right? And while I was there, paint got upgraded to coatings, and they got their own lab. And then the head of paint became the VP of coatings, but software still got stuck in the basement. I think that's changed nowadays, but that's the way it was 30 years ago, okay? And marketing has the same place at most dev tools, startups that software did at Lockheed, which is we're going to work and work and work, build this amazing tool. And then when it's ready to launch, we'll bring in a marketer and put out a press release or something. And that's completely the wrong way to think about it, right? For a long time, I said that marketing should begin at day zero, okay? As soon as you have an idea for a product, you should not only, start writing code for the product, but also you should start doing your marketing. But in the last few years, I've actually changed my mind. I now say marketing should start at day -1. What I mean for that is before you invest an hour of your time writing code, for the first prototype of the product, go out on social media and start talking about this problem. Post every day. If you can't attract an audience of people that believe this is a problem worth solving and worth discussing, then you need to rethink whether it's worth putting any time into creating a solution for this product, right? And marketing is not just Google ads, and buying sponsorships. Marketing is having a point of view and expressing it in a way that people can interact with it, engage with it, and follow you. Social media is a great gift. And so my advice to early stage founders, you should be posting on social media every day.
Adam, what's your take on, early stage founders, especially around the marketing topic, is having been in the startup space for, a long time, probably one of the most common requests I get from other people, founders, co-founders, maybe VCs. They're like, hey, we need to talk to you about I have a portfolio company getting ready to bring on their first marketer. What kind of person should they get? So I assume you're slammed with the same sort of question.
All the time.
What advice do you give people?
Okay. You cannot bring someone from a B2B background in and expect them to be successful at B2D. Okay. Mm-hmm. It is an entirely different discipline. And yet that's the most common type of error that I see early stage founding teams do, because, it's so attractive. It's so seductive an idea. I can just, marketing is hard. Here's a person who's been successful at a B2B company. I can just bring it in and then I don't need to think about it. Okay. This is a disaster. So I know that the term founder-led sales has been out there for a while. I'm a big believer in it. I've seen it be successful. I'm a believer in founder-led marketing at the early stages. And I define an early stage for a startup at pretty much up to $1 million in ARR, right? Okay. That's when you start switching over and say, oh, you actually have PMF and can work on scaling, right? And I believe that the founders should be leading marketing up to that stage, because a marketer is great at executing, but is not able to make the insights and the quick changes in direction that a founder can make. When you think about it, it's insane that startups should exist at all. You think about the great institutional organizations that like Google and Microsoft, right, and Amazon Web Services, they have tens of thousands of engineers. How is it that a startup can get an innovative product out with a tiny fraction of all of these great technological organizations? Yeah. The answer is startups' one advantage is they can make decisions faster, right? They can make decisions in 30 seconds. And so you need to have a founder involved in your marketing in order to figure out what's working and not, and to try new things every day.
That is a fantastic point. Adam, I want to switch to another topic. This one is about platforms versus point solutions or applications. So this is a topic that is particularly near and dear to my heart. So when I was at early stage startups myself, I usually scoffed at people who talked about what was usually our single product company or solution. They would call it a platform, especially if they were in front of a customer. They loved to call it a platform because that made us feel like bigger than we were. And I always thought it was wishful thinking more than anything else. But now as a VC, my biggest worry, especially for my early stage dev tool companies, is that they don't end up being just a dev tool company. Over time, I really would love for them to be a platform. So, from a positioning standpoint, how do you suggest founders think about this? It just feels like the tensions between these opposing views is a bit too much.
Yeah, every founder is faced with this dilemma. And it's because there are multiple audiences that they need to talk to. And we've done enough education that people know this, that when you're talking to a potential investor, you have to make your market seem as absolutely broad as possible. And the way to do this is by describing the platform that you ultimately will become. But the way you close your early stage customers is by focusing your product down to being just the product that solves the exact problem that your customer has today, so that there is some urgency about implementing it, right? And many founders, they're spun around by all the advice they're getting. I need to do a VC pitch deck that talks about it as a platform, and I need a sales deck that talks about here's the solution to the exact problem you're having. How do I conceptually fit this together? And the answer really comes out of Geoffrey Moore's work 30 years ago. He was the one that first got me excited about marketing as an analytical discipline. And he uses the metaphor of the bowling alley, right? That you have an initial pin, which is your initial set of customers. You got one solution that you sell to one group of people, right? And if you're successful, right, then that pin will help you knock over the two pins behind it. You take the same thing you're selling to one group of people and you sell it to a second group of people. And you take the group of people you've sold one thing to and you sell something else to them. And then over time, the pins knock down further pins behind them. So you start off with very much a point solution. And if you're successful, you will build it up into a platform that solves a whole array of problems. I think the best example of this is GitLab. GitLab, when it first got started, absolutely refused to call itself a platform, right? That was their differentiation. They said there are lots of platforms out there, right? But everyone hates to implement platforms. So like no one wakes up today and says, today I got a new platform at work. It's like, no, what a hassle, all right? Executives wake up excited when this problem that's been plaguing me for a year, I think I've got a solution to it today. That sounds pretty good. So GitLab said, no, we're a single application. We solve all these problems for you, okay? When you get to a certain point, though, that you're solving lots of problems, right, then you can make the conscious decision to become a platform. Because there's a shift in marketing, especially in the tools business. And I've seen this happen over and over again. When new technology comes out, people want to buy a tool that solves a problem, right? And there's an adjacent problem solved by an adjacent tool. And over time, the tools will get better. And over time, they will all go past the line of good enough, okay? At which point your customer criteria for how they choose which products to buy changes once all the tools in the category are good enough, right? And then all of a sudden it's, well, now they're all good enough. I really care about buying tools that work well with each other, right? And in fact, I'm willing to sacrifice functionality that I'll probably never use in order to get increase in interoperability between them, right? Understanding when that shift is taking place is key to understanding when you need to shift your positioning of your product from a tool into a platform that contains multiple tools. Because once you've passed the good enough feature point, then customers want to move to a platform and VCs want to fund a platform. But that's not how early stage startups need to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wish enough, again, founders paid attention to these really simple but very, very important aspects of how to position themselves. So switching to somewhat of a more nitty-gritty marketing topic now, Adam, one very seminal point that you make in your book is how the often cited the funnel approach, which is you start with awareness, then, customers move to interest, consideration, and decision. You say that this is actually quite irrelevant for dev tools. How so? And also, could you talk about the alternative for dev tool startups?
Thank you. Not only is it irrelevant, it actually has done a lot of damage to dev tool startups. Awareness, interest, consideration, decision, the funnel is a great model, right? It was invented by the analysts as a way to model how business executives adopt technology. And it's amazing that it works. And if you look at the modern marketing platforms out there, their architecture is all based on this idea that you move people along the funnel, okay? But I ask people, you've been a developer, think about a technology that you have adopted, right? You think about the phases and the activities that you went through, it doesn't actually match the funnel. So I've come up with an alternative. I call it the DREAM sequence, right? And it's DREAM. It stands for discovery, research, evaluation, activation, and membership. These are the phases that developers go through when they're adopting technology. I'll briefly discuss each one of these things. The first is technology discovery. Every professional developer has their own personal discovery loop. And these are the exact same things they do every day, every week, every year about keeping up with the changes in their technology. And this goes back to the fears that every developer has. The main fear is that all the years and decades they've spent acquiring skills will be made obsolete by changes in technology, and they will not be able to add value to their organization or any organization. Right? They may not articulate that fear, but everyone has it. And so what do you do to counter that fear is you stay abreast. There are certain people you follow, you go to conferences, you go to meetups, you read blogs, you're always interested in staying abreast. Think about when the first time you heard about ChatGPT was, right? And then what was the first thing you did, right? After you go through, you discover a technology, you go do research on it, right? And this means spending somewhere between 30 seconds and 30 minutes just trying to figure out what this technology is. Okay, you go to a website, you watch a video, maybe you read an article. Okay, it's interesting. It's going to occupy a corner of your brain. Okay, and then nothing. See, this is where most dev tool startups, right, are absolutely mystified. Developer curiosity destroys most of these funnel metrics because developers are always discovering and researching, and then they've got their job to do. They're not going to move into evaluation mode until they have the problem that your product actually solves, which hopefully you taught them about while they were doing research on you, right? Mm-hmm. And if you are in luck, when they have this problem, right, a little light bulb goes off and they say, wait a minute, there's this technology I remember researching that actually solves this problem, right? And then they're going to move into evaluation mode. And most DevTool founders also screw up evaluation. Evaluation does not mean I make claims about my product and people want to get a trial version in order to make sure that I actually make these claims. No, if you're in business, people assume that your product is going to do what you claim it does. Okay. Evaluation means that there are 40,000 libraries, platforms, and technologies out there. My shop is a special snowflake with no one else has the exact combination that mine does. I want to make sure if I bring new technology in, it doesn't break anything. So people want to know, can I bring it in and have it not break anything, right? Does it solve the problem I want? Then they're on to activation, which is what, from that decision that, yes, it works, to actually getting value. How fast can I make that happen? And then the last letter is M for membership, which is developers hate to buy but love to join, right? They want to know that there's a community of their peers, right? And it's not peers using the same technology, it's peers solving the same problem, right? Because those are the people that they want to communicate with to learn how to solve additional problems, learn how to solve their own problem better, and ultimately to brag about how they solve their problem and get respect from their peers. So this is DREAM, DREAM, and I would recommend that dev-facing companies replace the traditional awareness, interest, consideration, decision model with a DREAM sequence.
Who wouldn't want that dream? I love abbreviation. So you talked about membership, so that it's a great way to think about community building. Literally every DevTool company tries to build a community, it seems like. And as you nicely pointed out in your book and also mentioned now, devs like to be part of a community where people who have similar problems are, they have a voice, they're talking to each other, sharing their perspectives and such. And it is not the primary reason they become a member of such a community is not necessarily to buy product from a certain vendor that is fostering that community. So given that, how do you suggest founders who are trying to building a community with also the purpose of monetizing it, how do you think they should think about this dichotomy of community building for the sake of community building versus community building for the purpose of monetization?
So first of all, let me say that, I've created communities and run communities, but there are other people that have done more research than I have. And my friend Jono Bacon has written a book on it. My friend Derek Weeks has written a great book on it. I recommend their books, which go into it a lot more detail than I do. There are different types of communities, and there are some groups of people that are not communities. Okay, the group of left-handed people is not a community. So just because you define something as a group doesn't mean it'll make a community, right? What communities have in common is that they have a common mission. They all subscribe to the mission. And for developer communities, that mission is often around solving a specific problem. Okay. Now, there are other things about communities. I'm not a big fan. Well, I don't know. There are lots of different ways to monetize. Okay. I think that mistakes that founders often make is thinking a community is an audience. And it's an audience that they need to get up to and lecture to or give some type of performance. Because the vendors are the least favorite people that most community people want to hear from.
That hurts for the founders.
But it's true. I'm saying it because it's true. Right?
Yes.
The second favorite type of people that developers want to hear from in their community are their peers. Right? I want to know someone in a position similar to mine at an organization with a similar mission to mine. They've already had the problem I have, and they've solved it, and I want to know how. Okay. But of course, a developer's favorite speaker in a community is themselves, right? Every developer craves peer recognition. And so it's the developer tool founder's job to create a platform that allows your users to be acclaimed as heroes by their peers by explaining the successes that they've had. It's kind of obvious when I say it, but when you talk to people who are actually doing it, it's like, no, we just put our own experts on over and over and over again.
Well, I think it's tempting. It's almost like you want to either, I don't know if it's control the narrative or control the outcome. You're like, well, we'll put our, it's like there's something.
Yeah. The illusion of control, right?
Yeah,
We live in an era of social media, and the idea that you have complete control over your message, that's long, long gone.
Yeah.
Right? You want people talking about you behind your back, right? Digital word of mouth is what drives viral adoption.
So Adam, as we get near the close, we have a handful of questions that we want to do in kind of a rapid fire true false sort of way. I'll make a statement, you give it a true false, and then give us a sentence or two, keep it to maybe like, a minute-ish or less on just, why or anything, any thoughts behind it. So the first one, the role of the developer as we know it today will change completely 5 years from now.
True. I think the stunning productivity increase by today's Gen I tools is going to completely change the role of the developer, right? Not eliminate it. Mm-hmm. If I look back at the history of software development tools, right, there's always been this idea that we're about to enter an era where a business user can create applications from scratch, right? Starting with COBOL and BASIC and Power Builder. I've yet to meet someone whose card says business user. Instead, the demand for programmers only increased. The skill set expected of programmers grew, as did the number of professional developers. And I see that accelerating in the next 5 to 10 years.
So this one may go hand in hand, but I'll be curious to see. We're going to see more dev tool companies in the next 5 years than we saw in the 5 years before.
Absolutely true. I'm seeing that already. There's never been a better time to start a dev tool startup right now, right? Because what used to take millions of dollars to create a tool and to create infrastructure and then create a marketing campaign and get your word out, the costs for all of these are dropping like crazy. Social media enables you to build a large audience for free, right? Amazon and Microsoft are being very generous with the credits they give to get you locked into their system. So a lot of the technical costs are decreasing, and the productivity enhancements available for modern dev tools are making development faster. So at the one time, there's never been a better time to create a dev tool startup. Just realize you're going to have lots of competition.
So on average, it's going to take a lot more to get to $1 million in ARR for dev tool startups than it did in the past.
I disagree there. Okay. I think that if you can show value and show it in the right way, companies are happy to pay, right? To pay you a small fraction of the value they're getting. But you have to be very clear about documenting the value that you're delivering.
You mentioned AI a couple of questions ago. So here's one related to AI. In the new era of AI, the big players, think GitHub, JFrog, and the like, they're going to stand to gain the most compared to a new upstart.
So everyone is going to gain. Okay. And even if they do gain the most, the size of the market is increasing so much that innovative startups can also capture a share of that. The value of software development is not going to double over the next 10 years. It's going to increase by an order of magnitude. Okay. There is plenty of value to go around for both large incumbents and for new challengers.
All right. So this one, I think, is going to be, an obvious one, but it'll give you a moment to expand on some of the ideas you've had in the last few. So there is going to be less demand for developers 5 years from now than there is today.
I don't believe it at all. Every time that we've made developers more productive, right, has it led to fewer developers? No. Okay. It means that the cost of building an application has dropped, and we've moved more application projects off the backlog into getting actually done. If we can make developers 10x more productive than they are today, there is an existing backlog of applications that every developer could be working on. And for every business person that thinks of a new application, but saying, oh, this is going to cost us millions of dollars we don't have. Imagine just being able to think of an application knowing, right, that you can hand it to a product developer, right, and get it done for $5,000 or $2,000, right? Or use Fiverr and get it done for $25, right? As the productivity of developers increases, the number of developers is also going to increase.
Great. Adam, I was excited to get a chance to talk with you just as a fellow marketer. It's been excellent to just hear your thinking, especially after, digging into your book and sharing some of your perspective there. So Vidya and I both thank you. Before we wrap, can you give us a quick when can they start to expect to see stuff hit? What's the best way to get the different versions of the book?
Thank you for asking that question. I am self-publishing the book. It's available only from Amazon.com. The title of the book is The Developer-Facing Startup, and it should be available by the end of May 2024.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. That is no small feat, so pretty significant effort. Excited to see it hit the virtual shelves. And Adam, thanks again. It was fantastic to have you.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.